So I've been working in the fields of reproductive science and reproductive genetics for about the last 30 years, and it's a really, really interesting field. Things are crazy, so hopefully by the end of my talk you'll be a little bit nervous about where the future's going to be. So, in my field, it's quite a lucrative field, and so I think most of us in my field do some talks and things that we get paid for. So I just want to do my disclosure. So what I'm going to do, the first two talks have brilliantly introduced what I'm going to talk about. I'm going to talk a little bit about reproductive genetics and something that's called expanded carrier screening. Also something I've worked on for about 25 years called pre-implantation genetic testing, and then a little bit about something called non-invasive prenatal testing. But something that's really cutting edge and really exciting is about genome editing, and I want to talk about genome editing in the human, okay, in the human embryo, and then where the future will take us. So there's a group of us that get together every few years. We're experts in genetics and in reproductive science, and this paper's free downloadable. It's the interface between fertility and genetics, and some of the things I'm going to talk about are in that paper there. So we are in a pub, and Franklin, Crick and Watson in 1953, and I know probably no one in this room was born in 1953, I wasn't even born in 1953, but I do give talks where quite a few people are born in 1953. But the story goes that they were actually in a pub. He's actually holding there a pint of beer, and that they doodled the structure of DNA, the double helix, on a beer mat. That's how the story goes. So they did this in a pub in Cambridge, and I live near Cambridge. The first speaker mentioned the Human Genome Project and where the genome has been sequenced, and a huge amount of that work globally has been done in the Sanger Centre, which is in the town that I live in. And this is the world's first IVF clinic, so fertility clinic that made what we call test tube babies, made embryos in a dish to help couples get pregnant. And all these things are in Cambridge. So I know we're in London, but I just wanted to do a little, you mentioned Cambridge already, so it was good to mention that again, and it's a great place to deal with all this new technology. So, we already heard DNA sequencing mentioned, and it was around about, you said 15, I think you said 15 years, about 15 years or so, for the first human genome to be sequenced. That's what working with. James Watson was the only one of the three that discovered the structure, who was still alive in around 2007, and I think, did you say it cost 3 million or billion?
Billion.
Billion. 3 billion to sequence the first genome. By 2007, it cost allegedly about 1.5 million to sequence James Watson's genome, and apparently it took about 2 years, so we went from 15 years to about 2 years, and we've already heard that a genome can be sequenced now in a few hours, and so within 10 years it costs less than $1,000. Now, a few years ago I went to the opening conference at a place called the China National Gene Bank. I was very nervous for the invite. It was all these strange things about this gene bank, and I tried to Google it and nothing hardly came up. I thought, what is this place? Where am I going? It's actually China's answer to the Sanger Centre. So these were photos I took. These are their sequencers, and this is just a few of them. They also have a robotic sequencer that will do a genome in less than an hour. And as you said in your talk, it's not difficult to get the sequence, to get all those bases that make up our individual sequence. That's not difficult. What's difficult is what does it all mean? And this is just one row of the supercomputers that are analysing that information that they're getting in the China National Gene Bank in Shenzhen. And remember Shenzhen, I'm going to come back to Shenzhen in a moment. So their primary aim was to sequence 3 million people's genomes. I'm sure they've already done that. In the reception, they had 2 full-size scale mammoths, and they said they were going to sequence, they had the DNA of a mammoth, and they were going to resurrect the mammoth. They also said they were going to make an artificial human genome, and I'm not normally silenced. As I walked around, my jaw really hit the floor. I was like, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God. And we all joked, everyone there, they probably sequenced us before we left, because we actually, the speakers slept in the campus, in a bed with a big picture of chromosomes, so my DNA was everywhere. So yeah, it did make me quite nervous about what they were doing there. And this is what they told us they were doing. So what are they doing that we don't know that they're doing? So, you know, we've really got to be aware, and it's great. I say to everyone, you need to learn about genetics, and so you're in the right place tonight to really do that. So, what about reproduction? We've heard about what happens in fruit flies. Let's now hear a little bit about what happens in the human. Well, we can do genetic tests before people get pregnant. We can do a genetic test when we've got the embryo, or we can do it when they've got pregnant. Actually, can I just ask, has anyone in here had their genome sequenced? Oh, good. It's great now. I asked my students this week, and someone put their hand up. So I think, and I'm sure you're going to agree, I think in a few years, we will see more and more people put their hands up. I'm trying to get mine done, but I haven't done it yet. So yeah, I think we're going to see an increase. Did you understand what it all meant?
Oh yes.
Oh, of course. Yeah. So.
But you said yours is as well, so.
Yeah. So all of us in this room will carry some errors in our genome, and they're what we call recessive. They don't normally cause any problems. But if we have children with someone who's got the same gene faulty, then this is a recessive disease. If it's a recessive disease, it can lead to that disease in our child. Our children will have a 1 in 4 chance of getting that disease. So we are heading to the point now where we're trying to become genetically compatible. And we talked about 23andMe and other sort of more non-serious companies that do this, but I have seen and heard that there now is DNA matching dating sites, so you can see how genetically compatible you are. Listen, people will make money out of anything, and there'll be someone that will buy it, I'm sure. There's some really wacky things out there. But there are some communities where, mainly because they have been reproducing in a closed group, it's very interesting that in so many cultures it's encouraged to marry someone from your own community. Genetically, that's a disaster. You know, in Egypt, like I've been to Egypt quite a lot recently, the rumour is that some of the pharaohs married their sisters, maybe Tutankhamun, I think, apparently. That's a really bad idea. And it's a bad idea genetically, because the closer you are to your related, the more chance of you carrying the same rare mutation as the person you're going to have children with. So the further away, the more genetically diverse you are, it's less likely you're going to have any of these errors in common. But we all carry them. So these tests, what we call preconception carrier tests, these have been around for decades in certain high-risk populations. So one of the most studies are the Ashkenazi Jews, really had very contained reproduction. They have many diseases, there's quite a few, including Tay-Sachs and some other disorders. And then in the Mediterranean and African populations, we've got the hemoglobinopathies, and this includes beta thalassemia and sickle cell disease. So for these populations, we know they're at risk. So normally, almost everyone will get tested for just the specific genetic disease they carry. And in some countries, it's mandated. So before you get married, you have to, as a couple, you have to have the test to check that you are genetically compatible. So I know we were laughing about it, but this is really happening. So it does happen in Cyprus, Saudi Arabia, and I believe some other countries as well. I hear Greece, it's really encouraged. I know Sardinia, it's really encouraged, because the chance of you transmitting a disease to your child is quite high. But technology moves on, and we can now do a test we called expanded carrier screening. So this is a test any one of you in this room could do before you think about having children. You have to do it with your partner, because again we're trying to match you together genetically. So these are panels. These are just some of the companies. There's many companies that make these panels, and these panels, they're like DNA chips that contain lots of different tests on one chip. So we can test for multiple genes in one go for low-risk populations. And the data, especially in the US have found that the health economics of this is that it's better to pay for people to have the test than to risk the chance of having an abnormal child, because that could lead to, especially if they don't know, they wouldn't have had any tests, and they would only know when they deliver the child, and then they'd have a lifetime of expensive medical bills. So in the USA, they found that about 2% of couples, you might think that's quite low, but I think that's, you know, a reasonable amount to warrant doing the test. I'm quite for this test before a couple have a child, so that they know that they are genetically compatible. But you talked about de novo mutation. So these are errors where the parents don't have that abnormality, but the child does. So it's just happened spontaneously. And these tests would not check for that. We wouldn't know about that. This is just checking the parents. But I've been working on something since 1992 called pre-implantation genetic testing. We used to call it pre-implantation genetic diagnosis. It's changed its name, so it's now called PGT. And for this, what we do is we do a genetic test on the early embryo. So the couple have to go through in vitro fertilization procedures. So this means we get their egg and their sperm in the lab. We make embryos, and then what we do is we biopsy some of the embryo. We can do it at these various stages. This is, for the scientists in the room, this is taking the polar bodies from the egg, or we can take the blastomeres from the early embryo here, or these cells here are called trivectoderm cells from a stage called the blastocyst, and this is just before implantation. But we can take these cells out and we can do some really high-tech genetic testing. Now, over the years, we used to do all sorts of really hands-on things. We used to have DNA that we put electrodes on to separate, and looked in special labs to see if the DNA, where the DNA was and what size it was, or we used fluorescent tags to the DNA. But now it's all moving towards sequencing. So we can't do it yet, but very, very soon we will be able to sequence the whole genome from the embryo at this stage. So it's really around the corner. Now, I do a lot of work with the Human Fertilization and Embryology Authority, and they govern any creation of any embryo in the UK. So everything has to go through them. Everything's licensed and regulated. And this is just a few of the diseases. They're all on their website in alphabetical order. This is just a few of the diseases the HFEA have regulated. So they've said that anything on this list, we can test the embryo for these diseases. And there are some controversial ones on there, but we won't go into that now. Now, I really like knowing what everyone in the world is doing. I'm a little bit nosy. So over the years, back in the 90s, I wrote a couple of papers about what the world was doing with regard to this treatment. And then we set up something called the PGD Consortium back in '97, and we've been collecting a lot of data on this. I wanted to show you some recent data that we've collected. This is the UK data, one of my master's students collected. We collected the data in the UK since the Human Fertilization and Embryology Authority came into power, and they've been collecting data on every single cycle that's created embryos in the UK. So over that time, we've had just over 1 million cycles, but only 1% were by PGT, so that's relatively small. But the USA, well, just in the last 3 years that we've got data for, they did almost 100,000 cycles of PGT. And the reason why they've done so many is that they are using this to look at the chromosomes in the embryos. So I asked a question earlier about women's eggs. Now, unfortunately, all the women in this room, as we sit here, our eggs are getting worse and worse. Guys, sorry everyone. Guys, your sperm will be fine probably till the day you die. But for women, yeah, look, they're celebrating. a little tangent. Do you know how many, I love asking this question, how many sperm does a guy produce in one ejaculate? Come on, shout out some numbers.
1 million.
No, more, higher.
5 million.
No, higher.
1 billion.
No, not that much. About 100,000 million. Right, that will inseminate every woman in the UK. You might have 1 billion actually. We can check.
100,000. How much did you say?
100 million. Sorry, not 100,000. I've had a glass of wine. I know, that's a million. A glass of wine, then you can't even add up. 100 million in one ejaculate. Okay, that one is there's about 70,000 people, 70 million people in the UK. Women in the room, do you know how many eggs you will ovulate in your whole life? In your whole life. Shout out some numbers. Someone's working it out now. Who? Sorry?
500.
Yes! Well done. That's the mathematician over there. He deserves a prize for that. That was very, very quickly done, yeah. So we've got something wrong here. We've got serious gender imbalance here with our whole reproduction. It's really... Anyway, that's what I have to deal with. That's another talk. So... people have used this technology to do some controversial things. They've used it to sex select. So I've been recently in Dubai. Almost every case of fertility treatment, they use the PGT technology. They know the sex of the child. And guess who they put back?
The boys.
Yeah, they put back the boys, right? Many countries. I was also in Northern Cyprus. They do a lot. They put back the boys. Okay, guys, I just said one lot of your ejaculate can inseminate the whole of the UK. So we only need one lot, and we're fine for quite a few years. But a woman can only carry one baby for 9 months. So if we have loads of men and no women, we've got a problem. Anyway, but it gets more controversial. This is real. There's a company, the same company actually, that will, depending on your eye colour, the parents, they will help choose the eye colour of your children. There's also a company that will check the IQ of your future children. This is now, okay, now. Who has seen Gattaca? Hey, right, it's on Netflix. Homework for tonight, it's great. In Gattaca, it says, in the not too distant future, right? Everyone will reproduce by PGT. That's what Gattaca's about. Gattaca's about biopsying the embryo, sequencing the embryo, and only putting back the healthy embryos. So you heard about the Human Genome Project. So we can know about some diseases, but what about if we can check the embryo is going to have, or our child will have a low risk of heart disease, cancer, diabetes, etc., etc. If you had the money, because it's not going to be cheap, if you had the money, would you do it? Would you use this and give your child the best start in their life? But would you also go a bit further? Would you say, actually, I want the gene for perfect pitch, but you have to be carrying it, but I also want them to be Ronaldo. So I want some fast muscle twitch fibres and etc., etc. But in this case, this technology is here now, but you have to have those, the parents have to have those genes. But it's going to change. I'm coming back to that in a moment. I also just want to quickly mention that the biggest genetic testing in reproductive science is that now we can take some blood from the woman's arm when she's pregnant, 10 weeks pregnant, and we can now check, they do a complicated sequencing, and they can separate the free fetal DNA, which is from the baby, from the mother, and they can look at the chromosomes in the fetus just from the mother's blood. They can also, this was pioneered by this guy here, Dennis Lowe, they can also now pick up de novo mutations. And very soon, this is going really quick, So very soon we'll be able to tell probably everything. So we'll have the sequence of our baby before they're born, for sure. I have no doubt. And this is now free in many countries, and it's probably going to be free. It's already free for some people in the UK, but it's probably going to be free on the NHS to every pregnant woman very, very soon. So this is now. We're still not on the future. So, where do we draw the line? Should we use this technology to narrow our genetic pool? So Darwin's evolution was about mutation and about change. But should we decide what's the perfect genome and really narrow that down, and anyone who's diverse from that doesn't even get born? So I think putting all on quiet. I think the view is probably it's not comfortable. Iceland, close to becoming the first country where no Down syndrome children are born. Denmark aborted all but 4. What kind of society do we want to live in? We have to think about where we're going with this. So, let's look at the future now. Will we stop having sex? I'm not saying stop having sex. We're going to have sex, okay? Not now. But, will we stop having sex to have children? And I think, probably, we will. So, we are now, if you've got the money, I call it the reproductive and genetic privilege. You've got to have money to do this. The NHS are not going to pay for it. They don't even pay for IVF if you're infertile in most places. So, if you've got the money, would you go through IVF, test the embryo, sequence the genome, put back the best, healthiest embryo for you? And I took part in a Newsweek documentary called Will We Stop Having Sex? It's got a lot of thing about robots and things, so it's really good. You can access it via my website. I'll give you the link in a minute. Just wanted to say that I mentioned at the beginning, the industry I work in, I'm an academic, I don't get paid for this, but it's a really lucrative business, and they think that the ART, which is the fertility business, is going to be worth about $50 billion in a relatively short time. And I've written a lot of papers about this technology. So, to finish off the sexy part, genome editing. I'm sure you've all heard about this now. So, a few years ago, I was part of the Nuffield Council on Bioethics Genome Editing Working Group. We had an absolutely amazing time. This is the group here. We have philosophers, lawyers, social scientists, everything, a multidisciplinary team. We worked for 2 years thinking about every part of genome editing. We interviewed the main players in genome sequencing, the people who are building the supercomputers to work out what it all means. It was a fabulous time. And our report, there's a huge long one, or a short one, that's freely downloadable from the Nuffield website. And we concluded that there is 2 reasons why you might want to use genome editing. So genome editing, the CRISPR-Cas9, my colleague Helen O'Neill's going to talk about this tomorrow, but it's a really simple technique where you can just edit the gene of an embryo really simply and really cheaply and efficiently. But we're not ready to do it. We have to do research on the safety, the efficacy of this. You can have off-target effects, but we don't know what it will do. And you can have things where it doesn't quite work. And this is creating a future human. So we want to really be sure that if we meddle around with that genome, are we going to cause some serious long-term damage? So we all agree we've got to take it slowly. But we said you could maybe use this for therapeutic genetic interventions. So this is where there's a disease. But you do have the options of doing pre-implantation testing or the non-invasive prenatal testing. But controversially, we did also say that you might want to use it to enhance, genetically enhance your future child. So imagine the parents don't have the gene for blue eyes, they don't have the gene for perfect pitch, or they don't have the gene for fast twitch muscle fibres. So if they want a child that has that, and they've got the money, could we just edit it? Well, yes, we could. We could do that, and we could do it really, really soon. Michael Sandel, an American philosopher, said, to appreciate children as gifts is to accept them as they come, not as objects of our design, or products of our will, or instruments of our ambition. So the ethical issues around this are really huge. We have never in humanity meddled with the genome to this extent in the human, not even remotely. And now we have the technology to do it, and we have to tread cautiously. But okay, when we wrote the document, we published it, I think, in July, and this was, I think it was September. Really? Okay, any of us could have put it back, put an embryo back, but we didn't. And I quoted here, I said it's premature, dangerous, and irresponsible. It absolutely was. This was a crazy thing to do. These were just the press responses that I was involved with. These are all things that quote me, never mind about everyone else. I mean, that week was insane. We did not think anyone would be crazy enough to put an embryo back. And also, the reason he did it for HIV immunity, I won't go into it now, but it didn't make any sense at all. It really doesn't make any scientific sense to do that. It was not even something we considered. It's nuts. Now, who's heard of the term transhumanist? Oh, great. So, you need to watch a new drama on BBC called Years and Years. There's a young girl in it, and she wants to be she says to her parents, I want to be trans. And they're like, oh, that's fine. No, I want to be a transhumanist. So transhumanists, yeah, it is quite funny. Transhumanists, I was on a TV program earlier this year with the guy who runs the UK transhumanists group, and he says that we want to use technology to greatly enhance human intellect and physiology. So who's watched any of the Black Mirror? Yeah, that's better. Okay, right. Okay, that's it. That's it. We're using technology for recording implants or whatever to enhance the human being. And I mean, you know, you need to have a pint of science about artificial intelligence, because where that's all going is just off the scale. If we're merging the two together, it's crazy. But the bioconservatives say there should be hesitancy before we start modifying humans. But we have to talk about this because it's here and now. So, is the future utopia or dystopia? I haven't mentioned this, but there's a growing number of women globally who are freezing their eggs because they're delaying having children. If we've got the eggs frozen in the IVF lab, is it sensible to just add on this step where we check the sequence of it and transfer the healthiest embryos? And I was involved with a crowd science documentary last year about making an artificial womb. So will we just take the whole thing away and not even carry the child? So, has anyone read Brave New World? Okay, even if read it, please read. It's a very quick book to read. This was written almost 100 years ago, and in this book, no one reproduces by sex. Everything's done in a lab, and gender equality, because women don't have to carry a child, but I think we need to think about where we're going. I think we need public debate, we need legislation, and we need to think about the safety of what we're doing for our future generations. So I think we're going to see an increase in all of these genetic tests. I think expanded carrier screening has a short life, because I think every child will be born knowing their genetic code, so we will know who's a genetic match. When they grow up, we'll get a computer, put both their memory sticks in, and the computer will say, no. no, not you two. Right. So I'm sure this is where we're going to go. And as I said, everyone needs to learn about genetics for their reproductive future. So how will you, I know you're all young, so I put how will you, sometimes I say grandchildren if I'm doing this at a conference, but how will you make your children? Will we be freezing our eggs? Will we be, this is Kim, you probably know this is Kim Kardashian. So, do you know how she had her kids? No?
Surrogate.
Yes, thank you. Surrogacy. So obviously Elton John and his husband, they had an egg donor and a surrogate. And if you watch The Handmaid's Tale, really it's now. There's a growing number of American actresses who do not carry their children. They pay another woman to carry their child. And then Gattaca's or Dolly the sheep. It's all happening. Your future, your children, it's really all happening. So this is my team, and I do lots on social media, and so if you want to tweet anything, whatever, then please do. Thank you very much.
Do you have any questions?